The sky above Earth wasn't supposed to be this way. It was supposed to be peaceful, a calm blue with a sprinkle of stars in the distance. But on that fateful day, the sky was pierced by something far more dangerous than anything humanity had ever faced before. It started as a flicker, a faint blip on the radars. At first, no one paid much attention. The world was busy with its own problems, economic struggles, political debates, and the endless hustle of daily life. A small anomaly in the deep reaches of space. No one thought twice. But then it grew. It was no longer just a flicker. It became a roar, a signal of something massive, moving fast and heading straight for Earth. Satellites began to go offline one by one. Communications went silent. The first signs of an invasion were creeping across every screen in every city. At first, there was confusion. Military experts and scientists scrambled for answers, but they were too late. The object, no, the fleet, was already in the sky. Its size was beyond comprehension. The ships were massive, like floating cities made of metal and darkness with shapes too alien to understand. These were not explorers. These were conquerors. Then came the message. A voice, deep and cold, broadcast across every human communication network, shaking the hearts of all who heard it. People of Earth, we are the Kraljac. You are insignificant and your world is ours to claim. This is your final warning. Surrender or face your extinction. For a moment the world was still, silent. The threat of annihilation hung in the air, palpable, suffocating. Panic spread like wildfire. The Kraljac were an empire feared throughout the galaxy, known for their ruthlessness. Entire worlds had fallen to their armies, and now Earth, humanity's home, was their next target. The people of Earth knew fear, but they had never faced anything like this. The Kraljac's ships were enormous, towering in the sky, blocking out the sun and casting Earth into a shadow of doom. The invaders were demanding surrender, and if humanity did not comply, they would be destroyed, just like so many other civilizations that had fallen to the Kraljac. In the halls of the United Nations, the world's leaders gathered. The weight of the moment was crushing. Their faces were pale and their voices trembled as they spoke. The room buzzed with frantic debate. What do we do? We're outgunned, outmatched. We don't stand a chance against them. We can't give up. We can't just let them take us. It was chaos, but in the midst of the confusion, one voice rose above the rest. The President of the United States, Eleanor Hayes, stood tall. Her eyes, usually filled with the careful calculation of a leader, were now filled with a fire that burned brighter than ever before. "We will not surrender," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "We will not bow to these invaders. Humanity has fought too hard to give up everything we've built. We will fight." Her words were like a spark, igniting something deep within the hearts of every human who heard them. It wasn't just a message to the leaders in the room. It was a message to the world. The room fell silent as she continued. "We will defend Earth with every last breath. This is our home, and no one will take it from us." The room erupted into a mix of applause and murmurs of agreement. There was fear, yes, but also a growing sense of unity. This wasn't just about politics or borders. This was about survival. This was about humanity's very existence. The president didn't waste time. She issued an emergency global broadcast. Her message was simple yet powerful. "This is your final warning, Kraljac. Depart now or face the consequences." The moment those words left her mouth, the weight of them settled over the world. Humanity had drawn its line in the sand. The Kraljac had no idea what they were about to unleash. The people of Earth had been underestimated for too long. Now they would show the galaxy what it meant to be human. But the Kraljac didn't respond the way humanity had hoped. The message was clear. They didn't care. They had made their demands and they expected humanity to obey. The fleet above Earth hovered, silent, waiting for a reaction. The Kraljac did not fear the Earthlings, for they had conquered hundreds of worlds in their time. The humans were just another primitive race to be wiped away. But they had miscalculated. On Earth, the military was already preparing for the worst. The world's armed forces united under a common banner, no longer divided by borders or politics. The weapons were not the best, not by galactic standards, but humanity had one thing the Kraljac didn't count on: courage. The first ships to launch were the human fighters, small, fast, and nimble. The Kraljac ships, massive and slow, were designed for power, not agility. Humanity's fighters, with their sharp turns and quick maneuvers, were able to avoid the massive blasts fired from the invaders' ships. The first wave of human fighters, the Raptors, tore into the Kraljak forces, firing missiles and energy weapons with deadly precision. The invaders, caught off guard by the unexpected resistance, were forced to regroup. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their weapons. It wasn't in their ships. It was in their spirit, in the way they fought for one another, in the way they refused to back down when their backs were against the wall. The Kraljak were used to dominating, to breaking the will of the civilizations they conquered. But the humans, these fragile, imperfect beings, were different. They didn't crumble under pressure. They stood tall, even when the sky seemed to be falling down around them. On the ground, the fight was just as fierce. The Kraljak had landed, their massive war machines trampling over the landscape. But humanity's soldiers were already there, waiting. They fought with everything they had, using every tool, every weapon, and every tactic they could muster. Captain Marcus Juno, leading a special forces team in the middle of the chaos, knew this was the moment. The world was counting on them. They couldn't afford to lose, not today. "Push forward," Captain Juno yelled, his voice cutting through the smoke and chaos. "We will take back our planet." And so they did. Human soldiers, armed with cutting-edge technology and a burning desire to protect their home, fought back the alien invaders, one battle at a time. But the real battle had only just begun. The Kraljak fleet loomed over Earth like a dark shadow, their massive ships blocking out the stars. Humanity's last hope stood against a force unlike any they had ever known, and the tension in the air was unbearable. Earth had never faced an enemy like this, and yet something in the hearts of its people refused to give in. The humans had received the Kraljak's message loud and clear: surrender or die. But President Eleanor Hayes had made her choice. The world watched as she stood at the podium, her face a mask of calm resolve. The weight of the moment was visible in the deep lines etched across her face. Behind her, a screen displayed the terrifying sight of the Kraljak flagship, Sigra Thok, hovering ominously above Earth. It was a reminder of the impossible odds they were facing. Yet her voice was steady when she spoke. "We will not surrender," she said, her words carrying an iron will. "We will never bow to those who wish to destroy us. Earth is our home, and we will fight to protect it." The cameras panned to the people of Earth, to the faces of every nation watching, waiting for a sign of hope. The president's words were a spark, and that spark spread like wildfire across the globe. The message was simple but powerful: we fight. It wasn't just a message to the Kraljak. It was a call to every human who had ever wondered if they had the strength to stand against impossible odds. It was a rallying cry, a declaration that humanity would not go down quietly. Across the world, military leaders scrambled to assemble their forces. There was no time for fear, no time for hesitation. The Kraljak were not just invading, they were threatening extinction. The military forces of Earth united, setting aside old rivalries and national borders. They had one common goal now: survival. In orbit above Earth, the Kraljak fleet shifted into position, ready to strike. The massive ships, sleek, jagged vessels designed for war, hung in space like titans, their hulls gleaming coldly in the light of distant stars. Commander Valrock, standing aboard the Sigra Thok, looked down at the tiny blue planet below. His eyes, cold and calculating, narrowed. The humans had dared to refuse their demands. Valrock sneered. It was no surprise. The Kraljak had wiped out civilizations countless times. Earth was no different. They would bow to the superior force of the Empire, or they would burn. The fleet moved into formation, the enormous ships prepared to unleash hell. Yet there was one thing Valrock hadn't counted on: humanity's ingenuity. The Kraljak were used to conquering worlds with sheer force, and they believed that Earth's defenses would crumble before them. But they didn't know the humans like they thought they did. The humans were not easily broken. Back on Earth, the military forces were already mobilizing. The moment President Hayes made her declaration, the call went out to every corner of the planet. There was no time to waste. Humanity's military might was not the largest in the galaxy, but it was determined. It was united, and it was ready to fight. The human fleet moved into position. The Artemis, Earth's flagship, took the lead. Its sleek silver hull glinted under the light of the stars, a symbol of humanity's resolve. The ship was smaller than the Kraljak warships, but it was fast and nimble, and its crew was ready. Inside the Artemis, Commander Helena Markov stood at the helm, her hands steady on the controls. She had faced battles before, but nothing like this. Nothing that could decide the fate of her entire world. "We're ready, Commander." her communications officer, Lieutenant James, said, his voice tight with tension. Markov nodded, her face hard. Hold steady. The Kraljak think they can intimidate us, but they've made a mistake. Humanity fights to win. Outside, the other ships in the fleet, Titan, Spearhead, Raptor, took their positions, all prepared for the battle to come. In the cockpit of the Raptor fighters, pilots buckled into their seats, their hearts pounding. These were young men and women, some fresh out of training, others veterans of smaller skirmishes, but all united in their desire to protect their home. We take the fight to them, or we die trying, one of the pilots muttered, his fingers tightening on the controls. Across the globe, soldiers of all nations geared up for ground combat. On the streets, in the forests, and in the deserts, humans took their places, ready to stand against the Kraljak invaders. Captain Marcus Juno, leading his Special Forces team, was among them. His squad had been called in for the hardest missions, and they would be the first to feel the heat of the alien attack. "Stay sharp, team," he barked as they prepared to move out. "This is no drill. We do our job, or this world ends today." His team nodded, faces grim but resolute. They were human, and that meant something more than just being soldiers. It meant fighting for each other, for their families, for their home. Back in orbit, the Kraljak fleet unleashed its first wave. Massive energy blasts shot out from their ships, brightening the sky as they cut through the darkness. The Kraljak had no mercy, and they expected the humans to be weak. They fired without hesitation, confident in their superiority. But what they didn't expect was the ferocity of humanity's defense. The Artemis shot forward, its engines roaring to life as it narrowly dodged the incoming fire. On board, Commander Markov's voice was clear, commanding, "Return fire, now." The Artemis's weapon systems powered up, unleashing a barrage of missiles and laser beams that cut through the Kraljak ships. The Spearhead and Titan followed suit, each ship unleashing their firepower with precision, striking the invaders with deadly force. The human ships weren't as large, but they were faster and more agile. The Kraljak fleet, slow and massive, struggled to keep up. The Raptors dove in, darting through the chaos, missile locks beeping as they locked onto their targets. The Kraljak didn't stand a chance against the human fighters. They were nimble, quick, and skilled. With each blast, a Kraljak ship fell. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the Kraljak were stunned. Their advance faltered. Their ships, which had once seemed invincible, were now on the defensive. But Valrak would not retreat. He roared into the comms, his anger boiling over. "This is not over. The humans are weak. Show them what true power is." But even as he shouted those words, he could feel it. The fear. The humans were fighting back, and they weren't stopping. The Kraljak had misjudged their enemy. On the ground, Captain Juno and his team were already in the heart of the battle. They moved quickly, taking out alien war machines with precision strikes. The Kraljak were powerful, but humanity's soldiers fought with something the invaders didn't understand: love for their home and a willingness to die for it. Juno's team stormed an alien command center, their weapons blazing. There was no time for fear, no room for hesitation. The enemy was everywhere, but the humans were relentless. "We fight for Earth," Juno muttered, his voice grim but unwavering, "and we will win." As the battle raged on, the Kraljak realized that their invasion was not going as planned. The humans were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting with everything they had. And that was something the Kraljak had never faced before. It wasn't just a fight, it was a war, and the Kraljak had no idea just how strong humanity could be. The sky above Earth was a storm of destruction. The battle raged on, the Kraljak fleet continuing to rain down energy blasts from their massive ships. Every strike shook the ground below, sending shockwaves through cities, breaking buildings, and sending fear into the hearts of humanity. But even as the storm seemed to grow, something else was happening, something the Kraljak hadn't anticipated. The human fleet, though smaller, was more determined, more agile, and more unpredictable than the Kraljak had imagined. In the cold expanse of space, the Artemis, the flagship of Earth's forces, moved with a grace and speed that sent ripples through the invaders' lines. Commander Helena Markov stood at the helm, watching the battle unfold before her, her hands steady, her mind focused. "Report," she said, her voice cool and calm, but beneath the surface she was as focused as ever. "Multiple Kraljak warships down, Commander, but they're regrouping," Lieutenant James reported, his fingers flying over the console. "Their formations are tightening." Markov's eyes flickered to the massive image of the Sigra Thok looming above them. the flagship of the Kraljak Empire, a ship so large that it could swallow entire fleets with its firepower alone. She knew the Kraljak would not retreat easily. They had crushed civilizations for centuries, but they had not faced humanity before. "They won't back down, neither will we," Markov said, her voice firm. Humanity had already defied the odds once. Now it was time to do it again. The Artemis shifted position, its engines firing with incredible force. The ship shot forward, weaving between enemy fire, a silver streak in the dark, relentless as a predator on the hunt. The Sigra Thok fired a massive energy pulse, but the Artemis dodged with ease, narrowly escaping destruction. "Return fire," Markov commanded, her fists clenched on the controls. The Artemis fired back, its weapons lighting up the darkness of space. The Kraljak ship trembled under the assault. The human fleet wasn't as powerful as the Kraljak, but the humans didn't need overwhelming strength. They had something far more dangerous: unpredictability. Around the Artemis, other human ships moved with deadly precision. The Titan fired its main cannon, sending a deadly stream of energy into a Kraljak destroyer, splitting it in half. The spearhead flanked another enemy ship, unleashing missiles that tore through the alien's hull like a hot knife through butter. Human pilots, skilled and determined, weaved through the chaos, striking down the invaders one ship at a time. The Kraljak were stunned. They had never faced enemies like this. Humanity's strength wasn't just in their ships, it was in their ability to adapt, to think, and to fight with everything they had. Lieutenant James looked up from his console. "We've taken down 2 more ships. We're making a dent in their fleet." Markov's lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "It's not enough. We need to hit them hard." She turned to her tactical officer. "Send the Raptors in, full attack mode." The order was quick, decisive. The human fighters, small but deadly, shot into the fray, cutting through the alien lines. They were fast, nimble, and more maneuverable than anything the Kraljak had encountered. Their missiles slammed into Kraljak ships with precision, tearing apart the hulls with brutal force. Inside the cockpit of one of the Raptors, Lieutenant Anna Hayes, a young but determined pilot, locked onto a Kraljak warship and squeezed the trigger. The missile tore through the vacuum of space, slamming into the enemy vessel with a deafening explosion. "We've got them, Commander," Hayes muttered under her breath, watching as the Kraljak ship disintegrated into pieces. But there was no time to savor the victory. Another wave of enemy ships appeared, this time larger and more threatening. The Kraljak responded to the human offensive with fury. They sent their reinforcements, massive warships emerging from the dark expanse of space, their weapons charging with deadly power. The Kraljak had the numbers, and now they were pushing back with everything they had. But the humans didn't falter. They fought with every ounce of strength they had left. On the ground, Earth's soldiers were facing their own battle. The Kraljak had landed, their colossal war machines towering over the landscape, crushing everything in their path. But humanity was not as easily defeated. Soldiers of every nation fought together, setting aside their differences and focusing on one common goal: survival. Captain Marcus Juno, leading his team of special forces, crouched behind cover as alien weapons fired overhead, lighting up the battlefield with deadly bursts of energy. The sound of explosions filled the air, but Juno didn't flinch. His eyes were fixed on the target ahead. "Team, move out," Juno commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We push forward now, no retreat." His team sprinted across the battlefield, dodging alien fire as they advanced. The Kraljak war machines loomed in front of them, but humanity's soldiers were relentless. They fought with determination, using everything they had to bring down the invaders. Juno's squad reached a Kraljak transport, its massive doors open as soldiers poured out, ready to engage. But Juno and his team were faster. They stormed the transport, taking down the Kraljak forces with brutal efficiency. The alien soldiers were strong, but the humans were faster, more resourceful, and unwilling to back down. "Move, clear the area," Juno yelled as his team pushed forward, pushing the Kraljak back with everything they had. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they fought with the fury of people who had no intention of losing. Above them, the battle in space continued to rage. The Kraljak fleet had begun to regroup, their ships forming a new line. The humans had done more damage than the invaders expected, but the battle was far from over. In the Artemis, Commander Markov gripped the controls tightly, her knuckles white. She knew this was the moment. The Kraljak were preparing to unleash their full might, But the human fleet wasn't backing down. "We can win this," Markov said, her voice low but filled with conviction. "We just need to hit them harder." Her words rang in her mind as she ordered another wave of attacks. The Artemis fired, sending another barrage of energy into the enemy's ranks. The Kraljak flagship Sigra Thok retaliated, unleashing its own devastating firepower. The two ships clashed in a battle of might, energy beams cutting through the darkness. The battle was reaching its peak, but the humans had something the Kraljak did not, an unbreakable spirit. As the Kraljak fleet struggled to regroup, human ships continued to strike with precision, tearing into their formations. It wasn't just the technology or the weapons, it was the will to survive, the refusal to give up. The humans had something the Kraljak didn't understand, the ability to fight even when the odds were impossible. And that was something the Kraljak would never forget. Back on Earth, the human soldiers continued to push forward. They were winning battles, slowly but surely. Every alien that fell, every victory earned, pushed them one step closer to victory. Captain Juno's team fought on, taking down Kraljak war machines one by one. The Earth's soldiers were showing the invaders that they would not go quietly into the night. They would fight to the last breath. And so the battle continued, fierce, brutal, and unyielding. But with every blow struck, the Kraljak began to realize that they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity. And now the price of that mistake was becoming clear. The universe trembled as the Kraljak fleet began its full-scale assault. Their massive warships, designed to crush entire worlds, fired relentlessly at Earth. The sky was alight with the flashes of energy blasts, each one a reminder of the impossible odds humanity faced. But despite the overwhelming firepower, humanity refused to back down. In space, the human fleet, small but determined, fought back with everything they had. The Artemis led the charge, its sleek silver form darting through the chaos of battle. Commander Helena Markov stood at the helm, her focus unwavering as the fate of Earth hung in the balance. "We're holding them off, but just barely," Lieutenant James said, his voice tight with urgency. His eyes flicked over the battle grid as Kraljak warships continued to close in. "Don't let up," Markov replied firmly, her hands steady on the controls. "We've fought too hard to give up now." The Artemis fired once more, its railguns tearing through the darkness and slamming into the hull of a Kraljak destroyer. The alien ship shuddered under the force, but it didn't fall. Not yet. The human fleet wasn't as large, but they had something the Kraljak didn't expect: precision. Every shot, every maneuver, every strike was carefully calculated. The humans weren't relying on overwhelming force. They were relying on their skills, their ingenuity, and the unity that ran deep in their veins. On the screens before them, the Kraljak fleet's once mighty formation was beginning to break apart. The human ships moved in like a swarm of predators, taking out one enemy ship after another. But there was no time to celebrate. The Kraljak were regrouping. They were angry, and they weren't going to let Earth slip through their fingers. "Prepare for impact," Markov warned, as a Kraljak warship locked onto their position, unleashing a volley of deadly energy blasts. The Artemis veered sharply, narrowly dodging the incoming fire, but not everyone was so lucky. The Spearhead, another of Earth's flagships, took a direct hit. Its engines exploded in a fiery burst, sending shockwaves through space. The ship tumbled, spiraling out of control. The Titan moved quickly to intercept, firing on the Kraljak ship that had caused the devastation. "Spearhead is lost," a voice crackled over the comms. "We've lost contact with the crew." A chill ran through Markov's spine, but she forced herself to focus. Earth was losing ships, but they couldn't afford to stop. Not now. "They fought until the end," Markov said quietly, her voice filled with quiet determination. "We fight for them." On the battlefield, the Kraljak pushed forward with a vengeance, their massive warships opening fire on the remaining human fleet. But the humans didn't flinch. They kept their lines tight, moving in unpredictable formations. Even in the face of certain death, they fought back with everything they had. As the Artemis neared the Sigra Thok, the Kraljak flagship, Markov's heart pounded. This was it, the final confrontation. If they could bring down the Sigra Thok, the heart of the Kraljak fleet, the rest of the invaders would fall. But the Kraljak were prepared for this. Their flagship was heavily armed, its shields nearly impenetrable. But Markov had a plan. "Lieutenant, activate the quantum disruptors," she ordered. James's eyes widened in realization. The quantum disruptor was an experimental weapon capable of temporarily scrambling the hyperdrives and shields of enemy ships. If it worked, it could leave the Sigra Thok vulnerable. If it didn't, the humans would be sitting ducks. "Firing now," James said, his fingers moving quickly over the console. The Artemis's weapons powered up, sending out a pulse of energy that rippled through space. The Sigra Thok's shields flickered. Then, for the briefest moment, they disappeared. It was enough. The Artemis opened fire with everything it had. The railguns fired, sending projectiles streaking through the blackness. Missiles followed, tearing into the vulnerable Kraljak flagship. The Sigra Thok's massive hull groaned under the assault, sparks flying as the missiles hit their mark. It wasn't enough to destroy the ship, but it was enough to throw the Kraljak off balance. "They've lost their shields," James shouted. "Hit them hard." Markov's heart raced as the Artemis unleashed a second volley of fire, hammering the Sigra Thok with relentless precision. The Kraljak flagship was in chaos. The Kraljak had always been known for their ruthless power, but they had never faced an enemy like this. Humanity wasn't backing down, not even when the odds were impossible. The Sigra Thok retaliated, unleashing a barrage of firepower at the Artemis. But the human flagship was faster, weaving through the blasts with expert precision. The Kraljak were panicking. The humans were relentless. "They're breaking formation," James reported, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and awe. "We've done it. They're retreating." Markov could hardly believe what she was hearing. For the first time in the battle, the Kraljak were backing down. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they were paying the price. But even as victory seemed within reach, Markov knew the battle wasn't over. The Kraljak were dangerous, and they wouldn't retreat without a fight. "Stay sharp," she ordered. "They're not done yet." On the surface of Earth, the battle raged on. The Kraljak war machines continued their assault, crushing buildings and tearing through military defenses. But the humans were pushing back. The soldiers, the civilians, everyone was united in their fight for survival. Captain Marcus Juno and his team were deep in enemy territory, pushing forward against wave after wave of Kraljak forces. Their weapons were powerful, but it was their will to fight that kept them alive. With every step they took, with every alien soldier they brought down, they proved that Earth was not going to fall without a fight. "We're making progress," Juno muttered, firing his weapon as another Kraljak soldier fell. "Keep pushing, they'll learn the hard way." His team advanced, taking out alien war machines one by one. They were outnumbered, but they weren't afraid. The Kraljak had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their home, their families, and their future. As the Kraljak began to retreat, it became clear that they had made a grave mistake. Earth wasn't just another world to conquer. Humanity wasn't just another species to wipe out. They had made a mistake underestimating the strength, unity, and resilience of the human race. The battle was far from over, but the Kraljak were learning the hard way what it meant to face humanity. The Sigra Thok began to move away, retreating into the stars. The rest of the Kraljak fleet followed, leaving behind the wreckage of their once mighty force. They were beaten, and they knew it. But the humans had only one thing left to say to them: "We are not to be defeated." And with that, the Kraljak were gone, for now. But the message was clear: Earth would never surrender, not to anyone, not to anything. And the galaxy would remember the day humanity gave its final warning. The dust of battle still hung in the air, thick and choking. On the surface of Earth, the Kraljak invaders were reeling. The invincible empire, which had toppled countless worlds before, was now fighting to hold its ground. The human resistance, though outnumbered and outgunned, had proven one undeniable truth: the heart of humanity beat stronger than any weapon the Kraljak possessed. But even with their fleet in retreat and their forces scattering, the Kraljak were not yet defeated. They still had a few tricks left, and they knew it. On the surface, their war machines continued to tear through cities, leaving a wake of destruction behind them. And humanity's soldiers, those few brave souls fighting for their homes, were all that stood between Earth's survival and its annihilation. Captain Marcus Juno and his Special Forces team were deep in enemy territory, navigating through a city that was now a war zone. The once bustling streets of New York were now filled with the sounds of battle, the distant thud of explosions, the whine of alien weapons, and the steady rhythm of human footsteps as they moved through the ruins. Juno's squad had been fighting for days, pushing forward with relentless determination. They had already cleared several Kraljak strongholds, but the aliens were far from done. The Kraljak had sent reinforcements, massive war machines that loomed over the soldiers like giants, their armor impenetrable and their weapons deadly. But Juno's team had something the Kraljak didn't, a bond that couldn't be broken. They were more than soldiers. They were a family. And in the face of certain death, that bond made them stronger than any alien war machine. "Stay sharp," Juno said, his voice low but firm. "We've got one more push to make. The Kraljak are cornered. We don't stop until they're gone." His team nodded, their faces grim but resolute. Each of them had seen the horrors of war. Each of them had lost something, family, friends, or the life they once knew. But in this moment, none of that mattered. Earth needed them, and they would not fail. They moved quickly, darting through the broken streets, using the wreckage of fallen buildings for cover. The city had been reduced to rubble, but humanity had always found a way to survive, even in the darkest of times. As they neared the Kraljak's command center, Juno motioned for his team to stop. He knelt behind a large chunk of debris, scanning the area with his rifle's scope. The alien stronghold loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and fire. It was heavily guarded, but Juno wasn't afraid. They had made it this far, and they weren't about to back down now. "We take this by force," he said quietly. "We hit hard and fast, no hesitation." His team got into position. Each of them knew their role, knew their job, and trusted each other without question. Together, they would bring the fight to the Kraljak. The assault was swift. The first Kraljak guards didn't even know what hit them as the humans launched their attack. Explosions rocked the ground, smoke rising into the sky as Juno's team took down alien after alien. The Kraljak retaliated with blasts of energy, but the humans were relentless. They used every trick they knew, every weapon they had, and every ounce of strength they could muster. For every Kraljak soldier they brought down, another two took its place. But the humans didn't stop. They kept pushing forward, taking down war machines and enemy soldiers with unyielding force. Juno and his squad reached the command center's gates, an enormous steel wall that seemed to block their path. But they had something the Kraljak didn't expect. They had teamwork and they had heart. "Plant the charges," Juno ordered. His team worked quickly, setting explosives at the base of the wall. Seconds felt like hours as the countdown ticked away. Finally, the wall exploded, sending a shockwave through the air. The way was clear. "Let's move," Juno shouted, leading his team into the heart of the enemy stronghold. Inside, the fight grew more intense. The Kraljak had reinforced their defenses, and the air was thick with the sound of alien weapons. But humanity's resolve was unshakable. Juno's team moved through the base, clearing room after room, taking down enemies with precision. They fought not just for survival, but for the future of Earth. Outside, the battle between the human fleet and the Kraljak continued to rage. The Artemis and the other human ships fought against the retreating Kraljak fleet, slowly picking off enemy ships one by one. The Kraljak flagship, Sigra, was still in orbit, its massive weapons firing at the human forces. But it was clear, the invaders were losing. "We've got them on the ropes," Markov shouted over the comms, her voice filled with determination. "Keep the pressure on." The Artemis's railguns fired again, sending devastating rounds into the Sigra-Thok's hull. The alien ship groaned under the assault, and for the first time in the battle, the Kraljak flagship began to show signs of damage. "We need to take out their engines," Markov said, her voice steady. "If we hit their core, it's over." The human fleet gathered its forces, concentrating their fire on the heart of the Sigra-Thok. Missiles streaked through space, striking the alien flagship with brutal force. The Kraljak flagship shook violently, its engines beginning to fail. "We've got a breach," the tactical officer shouted. "We've done it, Commander. The Sigra-Thok is disabled." Markov allowed herself a brief breath of relief, but she didn't celebrate. The Kraljak were still a threat, but for the first time it seemed like humanity might actually win. Back on Earth, Juno's team reached the heart of the Kraljak command center. There, in the depths of the alien stronghold, stood the last line of defense, a massive war machine, unlike anything the humans had encountered before. It was a towering beast, heavily armored and bristling with weapons. But Juno wasn't intimidated. He knew that they had already overcome the impossible. "Team, we're going to finish this," Juno said, his voice calm but filled with fire. "We've got one shot, let's take it." They stormed the war machine, dodging blasts from its weapons as they moved in. Juno's team used everything they had: grenades, plasma rifles, hand-to-hand combat. With each strike, they chipped away at the beast, tearing through its defenses. Finally, with one last explosion, the war machine fell, its massive frame crumpling to the ground in defeat. "We did it," Juno said, breathing heavily but with pride in his voice. "We've won." The Kraljak had underestimated humanity, and now they were learning the hard way that Earth would never fall. As the invaders retreated, leaving behind a trail of destruction, the humans stood tall. Their hearts were broken, their cities in ruins, but they had proven something far greater than mere survival. They had proven that humanity would never bow to any force, no matter how powerful. The battle was over and Earth had won, but the war was far from forgotten. The Kraljak had left behind a message, one that would echo throughout the galaxy for all eternity: humanity is not to be underestimated. And from that day forward, the galaxy would remember the strength of the human spirit. The galaxy would remember Earth. The battle in the skies above Earth had shifted. The Kraljak fleet, once an unstoppable force, was now in retreat. Their massive warships, once gleaming with the arrogance of invincibility, were now limping away from the fury of humanity's counterattack. The Sigra Thok, the heart of the Kraljak invasion, had been crippled by the relentless assault of the human fleet, and now it was a burning hulk, drifting in the vast emptiness of space. Commander Helena Markov, standing on the bridge of the Artemis, let out a slow breath. It wasn't over yet, far from it. The Kraljak were still dangerous, and their retreat might be a trick. But for the first time, there was a sense of hope. Humanity had proven that they could stand up to the might of the Kraljak Empire, and that was something the galaxy had never seen before. "Report," Markov said, her voice calm despite the chaos surrounding her. "Commander," Lieutenant James replied, his voice tense, "the Kraljak are pulling back. They've lost their flagship and their remaining ships are scattered. It looks like they're trying to regroup." Markov nodded, her eyes narrowing. "We can't let them get away. If they regroup, they'll be back. This war won't be over until we make sure they know we're not a world to conquer." The Artemis wasn't alone. Earth's remaining ships, Titan, Spearhead, and the Raptors, were all closing in, their weapons primed for the final push. The Kraljak might be in retreat, but the humans wouldn't let them regroup. They would make sure that the Kraljak would never return to Earth. The battle had taken its toll on both sides. The human fleet had lost ships, valuable ships, but they had shown the invaders something that no one had ever expected. Humans had the heart to fight, even when the odds seemed impossible. The Kraljak had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. On the ground, Earth's soldiers were not resting either. Captain Marcus Juno and his team had pushed deeper into the heart of the Kraljak stronghold, taking down alien machines and clearing enemy forces. The streets of New York, once a symbol of human achievement, were now a war zone. The remains of Kraljak war machines lay scattered across the broken city, their once imposing forms now reduced to twisted heaps of metal and fire. Juno's team had fought tirelessly. They had cleared multiple Kraljak bases, destroyed their war machines, and taken back crucial ground. But there was one final objective they needed to accomplish. They had to eliminate the remaining Kraljak leadership on Earth and send a message to the invaders. "We've made it this far," Juno said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "Let's finish this." His team moved forward, eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of movement. The alien war machines were still active, but they were few now. The Kraljak were losing control. The world was slipping from their grasp, and Earth's soldiers were about to make sure it stayed that way. "Watch your six," Juno shouted, signaling his team to move faster. They were closing in on the last Kraljak command center on Earth. The alien forces inside were likely their final resistance. Once it fell, Earth would have won. The team moved like shadows through the destroyed streets, taking down Kraljak stragglers as they went. Their weapons hummed with power, and their movements were fluid, practiced. This was their home, and they would not let it fall. When they reached the Kraljak base, the gates were heavily guarded. Juno gave the signal, and the team launched their final assault. Explosions rocked the ground as grenades detonated against the Kraljak barricades. The enemy retaliated with a volley of energy blasts, but the humans were already on the move, taking cover and advancing. Juno's heart raced as he spotted the command center through the smoke. The Kraljak inside were preparing to make their last stand. But Juno knew something the aliens didn't: humanity never stopped fighting. "Move in," Juno shouted, his voice carrying through the chaos. "This is for Earth." The team stormed the command center, moving through narrow hallways and clearing rooms with deadly efficiency. Kraljak soldiers fell as they advanced, but there was no stopping them now. Their momentum was unstoppable. Finally, they reached the heart of the base. Inside, a Kraljak leader stood, surrounded by a few remaining guards. The alien was tall, armored in dark plating, and its eyes gleamed with the arrogance of one who had believed victory was certain. "You think you can defeat the Kraljak?" The alien sneered, its voice deep and cold. "We have crushed entire civilizations. You are nothing." Juno's gaze was hard as stone. "You made one mistake. You underestimated humanity." With that, the final battle began. The Kraljak leader fought with ferocity, but it was no match for the determination of Earth's finest. Juno and his team moved as one, working in perfect sync, dismantling the alien's defenses and striking hard. In the end, it was Juno who landed the final blow. With a swift motion, he drove his blade through the Kraljak leader's chest, ending the alien's life. The command center fell silent as the last of the Kraljak's leadership was wiped out. Above Earth, the battle continued to unfold. The Kraljak fleet, though scattered, still had one last trick up their sleeve. Their remaining ships had regrouped and they were preparing for one final assault. But they were running out of time. The human fleet was closing in, determined to finish what had started. "We've almost got them, Commander," Lieutenant James reported, his voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. "Their fleet is broken. We're down to their last few ships." Markov's eyes were locked on the image of the remaining Kraljak vessels. They were retreating once again, but the humans wouldn't let them escape. "Prepare for the final push," Markov said, her voice filled with quiet intensity. "We end this now." The human fleet surged forward, the Artemis leading the charge. The remaining Kraljak ships tried to regroup, but it was clear they were no longer the threat they once were. The human fleet's firepower had shattered their formation, and now they were the ones who were on the run. Markov's fingers flew over the controls as she issued the order to fire. The Artemis's weapons fired with pinpoint precision, tearing through the remaining Kraljak ships one by one. Missiles exploded against their hulls, and energy blasts shattered their defenses. The final blow came when the Artemis fired its main cannon, sending a devastating beam of energy into the heart of the Kraljak's last ship. The alien vessel erupted in a brilliant flash of light, its remains drifting into the void of space. The Kraljak were gone. Back on Earth, Captain Juno and his team emerged from the wreckage of the Kraljak command center, breathing heavily but victorious. The city was still in ruins, but it was their city now. Earth had won. The news spread quickly across the globe. The Kraljak, once a terrifying empire that had crushed countless civilizations, were no more, and Earth, humanity, had stood strong. But even in victory, there was no celebration. The cost had been high. Cities lay in ruins and thousands of lives had been lost. Yet amidst the destruction, there was something greater, the undeniable truth that humanity had fought back. They had faced extinction and emerged victorious. The galaxy had learned a lesson that day. The Kraljak had thought they could conquer Earth. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would never forget. Humanity had risen, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The dust of battle had settled over Earth, but the echoes of the war still reverberated through the world. The Kraljak Empire, once the most feared force in the galaxy, had been broken by the strength of humanity. Their ships lay in ruins, their leaders fallen, and their once proud empire scattered to the corners of space. Earth had won. But the victory came at a cost. The cities of Earth were scarred, some reduced to rubble, others still smoldering with the remnants of the war. The world had lost thousands of lives, and the destruction was a reminder of how close humanity had come to being wiped from existence. The battle had been long, brutal, and filled with moments of despair. But it was also a battle that had united the people of Earth in a way no one had ever thought possible. Captain Marcus Juno, his uniform torn and bloodied, stood at the edge of the battlefield. He gazed out over the remnants of New York City, the place that had once been the beating heart of civilization, now a war-torn graveyard. The once bustling streets were quiet, the hum of life replaced by silence, broken only by the occasional sound of emergency sirens or distant explosions. Juno had seen countless horrors in the past days, but the worst was over. They had defeated the Kraljak, and now they had to rebuild. He didn't know where to begin, but he knew that Earth had shown the galaxy one thing: humanity would never back down, not for anything. He looked at his team, his brothers and sisters in arms. They had all been through so much, had lost so much. Yet here they were, standing together. They had fought for each other, for the future, and for Earth, and now they would rebuild. "We did it," one of his team members, Private Reyes, said quietly. Her voice was raw, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "We really did it." Juno nodded, his gaze still on the horizon. "We did, but this isn't the end, it's just the beginning." Above Earth, in the cold emptiness of space, the Kraljak were retreating. Their flagship, the Sigra Thok, was a lifeless wreck drifting through the void, the symbol of their failed invasion. The few remaining Kraljak ships were scattering, trying to escape the wrath of humanity. The battle was over for now, but the damage had been done. The Kraljak were broken, but not entirely defeated. In the aftermath of the war, a new sense of fear began to grow in the galaxy. The Kraljak Empire had been the most feared force in the universe. But now, their failure at Earth was being broadcasted across the stars. For the first time in history, the galaxy realized that humanity, the fragile, insignificant species that had once been nothing more than a footnote in the records of the universe, was a force to be reckoned with. The message spread quickly. Through the dark reaches of space, from one alien civilization to another, the news of humanity's victory reached the farthest corners of the galaxy. The Kraljak had thought they could crush Earth, that the humans would surrender without a fight. But they had been wrong, terribly wrong. Humanity had fought back with everything it had: its ingenuity, its resilience, and most importantly, its unity. The Kraljak had been destroyed because they had underestimated one thing: the human spirit. President Eleanor Hayes stood before the Global Council, her face weary but resolute. The world had witnessed the destruction, the cost of the war. But now they had to look ahead. The rebuilding would take time, effort, and unity, but the victory was theirs. "Today, we are no longer just citizens of Earth," President Hayes said, her voice steady and filled with authority. "We are citizens of the galaxy. We've shown the universe that humanity will never bow to invaders, to tyrants, or to anyone who threatens our freedom." Her words rang out across the council chambers, each word carrying the weight of the truth they all knew now. Humanity was no longer the weak, fragile species the galaxy had thought. The Kraljak had learned that the hard way. "Other civilizations will watch us now," President Hayes continued, her eyes meeting those of the council members. "They'll be watching for weakness, but we have none. We must stand strong, united. We must never forget that we are the masters of our fate." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The world had been torn apart by war, but now there was hope. Humanity had proven that it was capable of extraordinary strength when united, and now they would stand tall. In space, the remnants of the Kraljak fleet drifted in disarray. The surviving ships had retreated to the farthest reaches of space, nursing their wounds and regrouping. They had failed in their mission to conquer Earth, and their empire had crumbled as a result. But it wasn't just the Kraljak who feared humanity now. All across the galaxy, alien civilizations were watching. Some had been allies of the Kraljak, while others had simply ignored the rise of humanity. But now, no one could ignore the power that Earth had unleashed. The galaxy had been shaken, the balance of power had shifted. The Kraljak, once a force feared by all, had been humbled, and in their place a new power had emerged: humanity. The first to acknowledge this new reality were the Xalian traders, a peaceful race that had long dealt with the Kraljak. Their emissary, a diplomat named Rylok, contacted Earth's government with a message. "We underestimated you," Rylok said in his transmission, his voice low and respectful. "The Kraljak thought you would fall easily. They believed your species was weak. We, too, thought you were no threat. But after seeing what you've done, we realize now that humanity is a force we must reckon with." The Xalian message was the first of many. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. Earth had not just survived the Kraljak invasion, it had defeated them. And in doing so, it had sent a message to every civilization in the galaxy: don't mess with humanity. In the days following the war, humanity began to rebuild. Cities were reconstructed, families were reunited, and the world began to heal. But the scars of the battle remained. The images of the Kraljak ships, their colossal forms breaking apart in space, were etched into the memories of every person who had witnessed them. The world had seen its worst, and yet it had emerged victorious. But the victory wasn't just for Earth. It was for every species, every civilization that had ever been oppressed, threatened, or forgotten. Humanity had shown the universe that the spirit of freedom could never be extinguished, that no matter how dark the night, the light of hope would always shine through. As Earth's fleet continued to patrol the stars, protecting their world and ensuring that the Kraljac would never return, the galaxy watched. They watched with awe, with respect, and with fear. They knew that humanity, once seen as weak, was now a power they could not ignore. And for the first time in history, the galaxy knew fear. And that fear had a name: humanity. The universe would never forget the day Earth stood against the might of the Kraljac and emerged victorious. And no one, not even the most powerful empires in the galaxy, would ever again underestimate the strength of humanity.